I didn't really realize that I had such a problem. I guess because when you're in school, you cheat. Somebody asked me, what did you learn in school? Learn how to cheat and how to manipulate people.
Tell me what you did.
Well, you kind of have to ask other people to do your homework, or you copy papers, ask other, you just manipulate people. It's horrible.
So you're a manipulator, huh?
Sort of, yeah.
What else did you do to get along after high school and in life?
Well, I got married right away from high school, and I was busy raising my kids. I didn't work. My husband did all the reading and writing and paying bills and everything. And then I got a divorce, and then it hit me. Then I realized, oh my gosh, I don't know how to read and write.
Tell me about them being boxed in, about this closeting.
I was recently speaking to a gentleman that was telling me that he had learned to read. His level was really low. And I think it's real painful for me to hear some of these stories, because he had known how to read women and men. And he went to a restaurant, and it said gentlemen. And he had to stand outside and wait to see what bathroom he could use, because he didn't know how to read the word gentleman.
Wow.
And these are people born here, gone to school here.
I went in women's restrooms a couple times, not knowing.
I'm drinking too much, and now I'm using too many drugs, and in the neighborhood I live in, there's just violence going on all the time. I need to get away from this here, and I'm gonna go to a place where this kind of mess isn't going on. And so, I got my bus ticket and came to Hollywood, California. I don't know what kind of thinking that was about escaping. So when I got here, of course, there was drugs and alcohol galore all over the place. So, from the skillet into the bar.
The pain of not being able to read must be so extreme that people will concoct all kinds of excuses.
To think that these people are living in such fear in this kind of a world, and in a reading world, a world where every computer and every street sign and every map, what happens if they're lost? What happens if they can't read their medicine?
And all the excuses they have to come up with must cause even more anxiety.
Right, and what if your fallback position fails and you then are put in a position of having to come up with a new fallback position, or a new excuse for not being able to read?
Right, like some of the excuses are like, I forgot my glasses, can you read this for me? Or like when you're in a restaurant, what are you having? I'll have the same thing, because you can't read the menu.
Oh, right. It not only shows how driven underground they are, but their fear of surfacing, because it's not like they're going to learn to read the moment they maybe feel they would like to go back and try and do it again. It's a long process sometimes, and so they're going to be caught in between. You imagine telling your friends, telling all the people, your family, that you can't read and haven't been able to read, and all the life you've been missing.
Right, and then that brings up the issue of betrayal too, which is even deeper levels.
Right.
So there's anxiety levels all the way along.
Right. Oh, I agree with you.
Second time I went to county jail. Remember, I was in a cell with an adult educator. He taught GED, and he was from New York, and I think he was he was an alcoholic, and if I remember correctly, he had some kind of domestic violence at that particular time. I don't think it was identified as domestic violence, but I remember he was being arrested for something like that. He was talking to me about it, and he was reading the newspaper. And he said, "Hey, take a look at this, man. This is crazy." And I think it had to do with the change of the law about not giving inmates release money and giving them more time and stuff like that. And I wasn't quite sure. I looked at it and I said, yeah, I think it's crazy. I had an idea what it was about because I heard talk about it. And I gave it back to him, and he kind of looked at me quizzically, and I knew he had the sense, that I hadn't read that article. He said, but when you miss a few words when you read, don't you? You read, and you read pretty good, but you miss a few words when you do it, don't you? I said, yeah. I said, so he knew what he was really doing. He said,
found you out.
Yeah, and he did it gently to draw me in. It was great. He says, hey, most of those words you miss, I can show you how to get them all.
And so, a couple of weeks later, I showed up at the library Adult Learning Center and was interviewed by the director, and she didn't know if I came here to be a tutor or a learner, and I shared my story with her, and I ended up in tears because I've had this secret that I hadn't told anybody.
The general manager one day, we became friends, one day she told me, just wasn't too blunt or sharp about it. She just told me, Stacy, you know what? You have a reading problem. And I was like, I'm exposed. I already know I have a problem, but no one has ever said anything to me about it.
I was at it was a women's get-together, and we were talking, and I was kind of giving this women some advices, and they said, oh, Annabelle, you're called to be a teacher. And I said, I'd love to teach the women, how the older women's supposed to teach the younger one. And so my boss at that time was just a friend of mine, and she asked me, why don't I open my house and do some teaching? And I shared my big secret that I didn't really know how to read and write really well. In fact, really bad. And so she asked me to get some help.
You graduated high school?
I went all through school here. Came from New Mexico probably about the age of 6 or 7. So all my schooling was here in Los Angeles.
Larry, Joe's story is really fascinating to me because he actually learned to read in prison. And statistics show that 7 out of 10 prisoners are way below the levels of literacy in our society. And Joe grew up in a family where his mother was a drug addict, his father was not in the home. He really had no one at all to guide him. And when you come from a family where the parents are uneducated or have low education levels, the chances of the children taking that same route are very high unless the parents can break through that barrier and learn to read and read to the children. It's very important. To break the cycle of illiteracy, the parents need to read to the children.
The people who are in prison now very well could be the children who were rageful, acting out, the non-readers who couldn't get it for reasons that really weren't their own, and because of this kind of rage and this kind of anger, it led them into this prison episode, into this law-breaking type of episode. And so it's really a shame that what could have been with these people if they would have learned to read. You wonder how their lives might have turned out.
Suppose you're in a job where you're earning a living for your family, you're getting by all right, things are okay, but not as good as they could be. And then you admit that you don't know how to read, and in order to get help, well, then you might lose your job.
And everything else. Yeah. So why don't we see how our people came out here?
Learning to read opened up the door for me to take a look at the emotional effect, the psychological effect, the trauma. I mean, the trauma that I had stuffed, that I had kept secret, that the only person that knew about it was my wife, and she didn't even know how angry and how outraged I was. I'm just peeling the shame today, of it. It's still such a shameful thing because we really think of illiterate people. I mean, today, yesterday, and when I was in school, is that they're dumb, they're lazy, they don't care. And that's a bum rap. I'm sure there's going to be people that are going to be viewing this piece here, and they thought they were alone. I mean, I meet people all the time that didn't know that There's millions of us. Some of us just walk by and get it, and we can't remember how we learned to read. And a lot of those people that did that became teachers, and they projected their experience on people like me, which was devastating. I didn't get it that way. I had to be taught. Sometimes when I speak to people, I say, don't worry about building my self-esteem. Teach me how to read, write, and spell. Teach children how to read, write, and spell. They'll go get their own self-esteem. All the research in the last 10 years and my own personal experience demonstrates that we're all capable of learning how to read and write and spell with proper instruction.
Interesting that the first time I went, my reading level was measured at by 4th grade. My vocabulary was about 3rd grade. And my math was nothing. 7th time I was incarcerated, my reading level was 11th grade.
Wow.
My vocabulary, interesting though, my vocabulary was 14. And so because of the unstructured way of reading, not reading to a certain discipline, my reading had improved, but my vocabulary had increased tremendously. Being involved in the literacy program, and it's interesting about the encounters that we have with our residents, because the average man, because I work with just men, but it's the same for women too, the average man who comes into the doors, the language improvement program, which is what we call it, they come with a history of failure. So they're walking in the door with failure, on their minds. Anyway, and I understand that. I understand how you walk in the door with failure and apprehension. And I look in their faces and I can see the apprehension, because any time you have to tell someone that you cannot do something what a 6-year-old can do, what your kids can do, any time that you have to admit to that kind of knocked a lot of gusto, so to speak, out you, especially, if you've been playing the macho game. And one of the things I do is, disclosure on a one-on-one basis and talk about my personal experience and what I went through and relate it, and, use incidents and tell stories about what I encountered. You know what I'm talking about, you understand. And try to have some relationship. I really believe that one of the problems that we have in helping, and from well-intentioned people, you don't really mean any harm in this, is that quite often a person will go to a literacy program for help, and they get, they get a bunch of papers pushed in front of them, either, I'm going to help you with it or give them to them, and, so, okay, hey, do you remember I came here for literacy help, And I think what's more important is to try to develop a relationship. A relationship is very, very important, because if look at how we learned and see how someone we had a relationship inspired us to learn. If we build that relationship, we can find the technique that's going to work. Quite often we want to get involved in the technique before we get in a relationship. A lot of them they have been to prison, and where we got an advantage at is that because they are substance abusers and they have problems with that, well, they're in a rehab center with other substance abusers, so there's some sense of equal degradation, so to speak. They're addicts, and we have and by being a substance abuse centers, and people tell their stories about their degradation to drugs. Well, it's a little bit easier to say, okay, I can't read also. And all tutors would tell you that, and they eventually learn that, is that the ones who most inspired, and I'm not saying the ones who learn the most, but most inspired are the ones that develop a relationship. Any way I move them forward is forward, and that's what's important, to allow them the minimal success, so they return. Quite often, well-intentioned, anxious people who really want to learn, I'm going to teach you to them, I'm going to teach you to just, get a little bit over-exuberant and give them more than they can bear. And so, again, I say it's the relationship first. If you can develop the relationship and keep things out of that's incorrect, that's wrong, things like try again, let's look at it another way, these are very, very important in the initial contact. And I think it's the relationship going to set the foundation. If you're going to deal with a person emotionally, you're going to have to deal with the emotional level. And reading has no emotion. It's the emotion that's going to be shared between the two people.